European leaders agreed on the need to reactivate the Team Europe initiative following a meeting in Rome to tackle the worsening migration situation. Ursula von der Leyen and her Commission survived a motion of censure tabled against her by the far right in the European Parliament on Thursday.
Together with international efforts to boost both private and public investment in Ukraine's reconstruction, Russia's latest wave of unprecedented attacks against Ukraine has dominated discussions here at the fourth edition of Ukraine's recovery conference that is taking place here in Rome. In June alone, Russia launched around 5,500 drones against Ukraine, a record number. Now, on the first day of the conference, Ukrainian President Zelensky, speaking to journalists, said that as Russia wants to continue the war, unity among countries is the only way to stop the fighting. He also said that it's important to have guarantees in the next round of negotiations and not just words. And he stressed the importance of reaching an agreement among Western partners on the need to increase drone production. Now, we know that a few days ago, US President Donald Trump said that he will send more weapons to Ukraine after early reports had suggested that the US was going to halt some shipments. Zelensky confirmed in the press conference that he had discussed the Patriot missile system with US President Donald Trump, something that Ukraine sees as crucial to defend itself against Russian attacks. Now, on the first day of the conference, according to official figures, around 8,300 people took part in the event, which is going to continue on Friday, which is the second and last day of the conference. Giorgio Orlandi for Euronews in Rome.
She's eight years old.
The EU's Ursula von der Leyen, meeting with Mediterranean leaders in Rome, agreed on the need to reactivate the Team Europe initiative with a new delegation of the European Commission to redeploy to Libya to tackle the ongoing migrant crisis. The meeting, which also featured Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and Maltese Prime Minister Robert Abella, was held on the sidelines of the Ukraine Recovery Conference. The leaders agreed to bolster efforts to crack down on the surge of migrant boats arriving at European shores, largely originating from Libya. The Commission delegation will also be accompanied by relevant ministers from Greece, Italy, and Malta. They will redeploy to Libya to hold talks with authorities on the worsening crisis after the previous mission was expelled from the country. Greece says it's been intercepting boats carrying hundreds of migrants daily along its shores, all of which originate from Libya. Athens has introduced emergency measures to tackle the surge in migration, recently announcing a suspension in asylum processing for migrants from North Africa. A spokesperson for the European Commission says Brussels is committed to helping its member states address the crisis and will offer all support necessary to combat what they called an exceptional situation.
The UK and France are reportedly in talks to announce a one-in, one-out migration deal, which would see the UK taking in some asylum seekers while sending others back to France. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer are discussing details of how to clamp down on illegal immigration across the Channel, which both call a priority. The UK has previously pressured France to change its approach and laws, including giving police officers more power to arrest migrants afloat.
We all agree the situation in the Channel cannot go on as it is. So we're bringing new tactics into play and a new level of intent to tackle illegal migration and break the business model of the criminal gangs.
The details of the agreement, which could reportedly involve the UK giving France funding to cover the costs of boats, police officers and drones, are still unclear. The deal's announcement is set to take place at the end of the first three-day state visit by an EU head of state since Brexit.
Trap or strategic error? Why did the EU want to meet Marshal Haftar, the strongman of eastern Libya? The Commissioner for Migration and 3 European ministers were expelled from Libya on Tuesday due to a protocol problem, according to Brussels. After a meeting with the Libyan government in Tripoli, the European delegation was supposed to meet Marshal Haftar in Benghazi. But Haftar reportedly tried to force the EU's hand by imposing the presence of his ministers.
It was simply a ruse by Haftar to try to legitimize this government in the civilian face of his military dictatorship. And so when the ruse didn't work, and when the EU ambassador and other diplomats said that they are unable to meet with the government, well, Haftar, as the English say, he threw his toys out of the pram. He PNG'd the European diplomats and essentially sent them back to Europe because he was not able to use them for this political charade that he was trying to pull off.
Libya is divided in two. In the west of the country, the UN-recognized Government of National Unity is led by Prime Minister Abdelhamid Dbeibeh. The east is controlled by his rival Marshal Khalifa Haftar, head of the self-proclaimed Libyan National Army. The European Union cooperates with Libya to combat illegal immigration and smuggling networks. In recent years, crossings to Europe from eastern Libya have been on the rise.
The EU has been collaborating both from the EU and from the member states, especially from Italy, with the Libyan Coast Guard in the west to try to somehow cut down the flows of migration. And the EU has also been supporting the efforts of the Libyans to take back the migrants once they're back on Libyan soil. That, of course, has been controversial because there's been a lot of questions about their human rights, about the treatment that they receive when they're in Libya.
However, there are questions about the EU's need to meet Marshal Haftar.
We are empowering a Russian proxy who is antagonistic to European interests. And so, once we clear away all of the mess of the current crisis, it becomes quite clear that what Europe really needs in Libya is a stable government and a sovereign government.
In particular, he accuses the Haftar family of using migration as a tool to obtain concessions from the EU. In recent days, Greek islands have seen a large influx of migrants from Libya. More than 500 migrants were transferred to the port of Lavrio near Athens on Thursday after being intercepted south of the island of Crete. The migrants, mainly young men, were transferred overnight on a bulk carrier. Another group of 200 people were transferred to the port of Piraeus near the capital in a separate operation from Crete. The migrants will be sent to detention facilities on mainland Greece. Transfers to the mainland were ordered because makeshift reception centers on Crete have reached capacity as migrant arrivals surged to 500 per day since the weekend. It also comes after Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis announced the implementation of emergency measures to address the surge in Mediterranean crossings from Libya. Mitsotakis also announced on Wednesday that Athens will suspend asylum processing for migrants arriving by sea from North Africa for 3 months. The new emergency measures are expected to go into effect following the completion of a final formal proceeding.
The European Commission survived a no-confidence vote that has just been voted here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. 175 members of the Parliament voted in favor of the motion of censure, while 360 voted against and 18 abstained. The motion of censure was well below the votes needed, the threshold needed to be successful, which was 2/3 of the votes cast. Representing at least the majority of the total number of the MEPs. So 360 votes were needed to topple the Commission. But most of the political groups of the European Parliament backed the Commission by rejecting this motion of censure. Of course, the European People's Party voted unanimously against, but also the Socialists and Democrats, Renew Europe and the Greens voted against, even with some abstentions. The far-right groups, Patriots for Europe and the Europe of Sovereign Nations, as well as large part of the European Conservatives and Reformists and some delegation of the left, voted against the Commission, so in favor of the motion of censure. So for the moment, Ursula von der Leyen, which was not present in the hemicycle during the vote, is safe. But the vote and the debate previous to the vote has left some doubts about the support for her agenda here in the Parliament. Vincenzo Genovese, Euronews, Strasbourg.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev are meeting this Thursday in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, to discuss next steps in finalizing the peace agreement their offices have confirmed. This is the first formal bilateral meeting of the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan since they agreed on the draft text of a peace deal following almost 4 decades of conflict.
This is particularly important because it's a bilateral summit. With Russia overwhelmed by its failed invasion of Ukraine, this is very much at the exclusion of Russia.
In September 2023, Azerbaijan reclaimed full control of the Karabakh region after a lightning military campaign following decades-long conflict with Armenia in which Russia was a central actor.
Azerbaijan's launch of a war in 2020 and its military seizure of Nagorno-Karabakh has exposed the emptiness of a security reliance on Russia. But I would also say Armenia and Azerbaijan, ironically, share a same pursuit, a policy to defy Moscow, pushing back and pushing out Russia from the South Caucasus. A significant lesson learned from the Ukrainian battlefield is the surprising weakness and incompetence of the Russian armed forces. That's an important lesson for all of the countries in the near abroad, Russia's neighbors.
Analysts believe Moscow losing its influence in the region will leave a dangerous vacuum of power which Turkey is seeking to regain.